It's one of the most common tools in the world. Everyone uses it, from fancy restaurants to quick dinners at home. For most of history, the fork wasn't welcome at the table. It was seen as strange, unnecessary, even sinful. For centuries, people believed eating with your hands was the proper way. Forks were mocked, resisted, and accused of being a symbol of pride and vanity. Kings ignored them, priests condemned them, and ordinary people thought they were ridiculous. Yet today, we can't imagine a meal without one. So, how did this simple piece of metal go from scandal to standard? The story of the fork isn't just about design. It's about culture, class, and the long struggle to change how people eat. Long before the fork appeared, eating was simple and communal. Most people used their hands, and that wasn't considered rude. It was tradition. Meals were often shared from large dishes placed in the center of the table, and everyone reached in to take their portion. In many ancient cultures, from Greece and Rome to medieval Europe, hands were the main utensils, sometimes helped by a knife for cutting and a spoon for soups or grains. Bread served as both food and tool, used to scoop or soak up what was left. It was a practical system shaped by the food people ate. Etiquette still existed though. Diners washed their hands before and after meals, and there were clear customs about which hand to use and how to behave at the table. Using your hands wasn't a sign of being uncivilized, it was part of the ritual of eating. In a world where meals were built for sharing and food was designed to be held, the fork didn't seem necessary. There was no gap to fill, at least not yet. The fork's earliest life wasn't glamorous. It began as a tool, not an eating utensil, a simple two-pronged implement used to hold meat steady while carving or to lift food from fire and pot. Versions of it appeared in ancient Persia and Egypt, but these weren't meant for the table. They belonged in kitchens and temples, not dining halls. That changed in the Byzantine Empire around the 7th to 9th centuries, where the fork quietly made its way from the kitchen to the table, but only in royal courts. Byzantine nobles used small, delicate forks made from silver or gold, designed for elegance rather than necessity. They were symbols of wealth and refinement, often paired with other luxurious dining habits. One of the most famous early adopters was Theodora Anna Dukaina, a Byzantine princess who brought her fork to Italy in the 11th century when she married into Venetian nobility. Her new family was shocked. To them, this foreign tool looked excessive, even arrogant, and that reaction wasn't unique. Across Europe, the fork seemed out of place in a world where eating with your hands was not only normal, but proper. At this point, the fork wasn't spreading because it solved a problem. It was spreading because of status. In Byzantium, it reflected refinement and ceremony. In the West, it represented something suspicious, an unnecessary luxury. That clash between practicality and perception would shape the fork's story for centuries to come. When the fork first arrived in Europe, it wasn't welcomed with curiosity. It was met with disbelief. To most people, it seemed unnecessary, even foolish. After all, hands had always done the job, and knives and spoons covered the rest. Why replace them with a metal claw? In 11th century Italy, Byzantine princesses like Theodora Anna Dukaina and Maria Argyropolina shocked their new families by bringing small golden forks to the table. Their hosts saw it as a foreign habit, a display of vanity. One Venetian writer described the fork as a needless luxury. Some church leaders went further, saying it was against nature, even against God, since hands were created for eating. That view stuck. For centuries, much of Western Europe saw the fork as a symbol of pride and excess. In the Middle Ages, humility was a virtue, and eating with your hands was seen as honest and human. Using a fork looked pretentious, something only the overly refined would bother with. Even as trade and travel exposed more people to the idea, it remained a curiosity. Nobles might see it as foreign courts, but few adopted it back home. The fork had crossed borders, but not minds. It would take a change in culture, not just design, for people to see it differently. The fork's slow climb to acceptance began in Renaissance Italy, a time when dining turned from a daily routine into an art form. Meals became displays of culture and refinement, where every gesture at the table reflected education and status. In this setting, the fork suddenly made sense. It wasn't just about function anymore, it was about elegance and control. Italian nobles started using forks regularly, especially in wealthy courts like Florence and Venice, where food was served in delicate portions, dressed with sauces, and too refined to be torn apart by hand. Using a fork showed grace and, more importantly, restraint, a key value in aristocratic behavior. Hands were seen as too direct, too impulsive for this new idea of manners. Through travel and diplomacy, this custom spread across Europe. By the 16th century, French and English visitors to Italy wrote about the strange tool, often with curiosity or amusement. One of the earliest advocates was Thomas Coryat, an English traveler who adopted the habit after visiting Venice. When he brought it back home, he was mocked as eccentric, even effeminate. But he was ahead of his time. Within a century, this odd habit became a mark of good breeding. As European society moved toward greater formality and hygiene, the fork gained new purpose. It kept hands clean and food untouched. Doctors and etiquette writers began to support it, linking good manners with cleanliness, a growing priority in the early modern world. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the fork had become a standard in the homes of the wealthy and educated, and as industry advanced, mass production made it accessible beyond the elite. What began as a symbol of pride had transformed into a tool of civilization, one that now defined proper dining across Europe. The fork had finally earned its place at the table, not because people needed it, but because their world had changed enough to want it. As the fork became more accepted, its design began to change. The earliest table forks were two-pronged, sharp and narrow, meant for spearing food. They worked for fruit and cooked meat, but not much else. They couldn't hold softer foods or balance a bite easily, and they often tore what they touched. It was functional, but awkward. By the 17th century, craftsmen started experimenting. Three-pronged forks appeared first, offering better grip and balance. A century later came the four-pronged design, the version that finally felt natural in the hand. The spacing between the tines allowed food to rest securely, while the slight curve made scooping and lifting effortless. That shape hasn't needed much change since. Materials evolved alongside the design. Early forks were made from silver, gold, or bronze, and reserved for the wealthy. Iron versions existed but rusted easily. The arrival of stainless steel in the 19th century solved that. Durable, affordable, and easy to clean. Suddenly, the fork wasn't just refined, it was practical. Specialization followed. As dining became more complex, so did utensils. Salad forks, dessert forks, carving forks, and more, each shaped for a purpose. The fork had grown from a foreign curiosity into a symbol of precision, a simple idea perfected over centuries. By the time the modern era arrived, the fork's design had reached a point of balance, comfortable, reliable, and universal. It's one of those inventions that needed centuries of slow refinement to become what it always seemed destined to be. After centuries of resistance, reinvention, and refinement, the fork has become one of the most familiar tools on Earth. It's part of nearly every meal in the Western world, so common that its long struggle is easy to forget. Today, the fork stands for more than convenience. It represents a shift in how people eat, think, and share space at the table. It reflects a culture built on order, cleanliness, and individual portions, ideas that spread with modern dining and etiquette. But it isn't universal. In many parts of Asia, chopsticks remain central to tradition. In India, the hand still connects food and culture, seen as a more natural and spiritual way to eat. Around the world, different tools carry the same purpose: to bring people together over food. Yet, each one tells a unique story about history, values, and identity. The fork's journey from suspicion to acceptance shows that inventions don't just shape culture, they're shaped by it. It didn't become essential because it was perfect. It became essential because people changed how they wanted to live. 1,000 years ago, the fork was a symbol of arrogance. Today, it's a quiet standard of everyday life. Proof that even the simplest tools can carry centuries of transformation. And it makes you wonder, what other everyday objects had to fight this hard for a place in our lives? Tell me what story we should uncover next. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also leave a comment with what you'd like to see in the following videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.